Well, we've been in our message series now for the past several weeks, and we've been taking this journey through the 23rd Psalm. It's kind of interesting to note that this psalm was actually written from the perspective of an animal. As a matter of fact, I think it's the only passage in the Bible that I'm aware of that is written from the perspective of an animal. It's written from the perspective of a sheep. And at the beginning of the psalm, you have one sheep who seems to be on one side of the fold. He's in the shepherd's good care. He's very happy with where he is. And he's talking to a sheep on the other side of the fence in another fold. And the sheep is doing more than just talking. He's actually doing some bragging. He's bragging to the other sheep that my shepherd is the one who takes care of all of my needs. And because of that, I really don't have any wants. He's my shepherd, and he makes sure that I am well fed. He is my shepherd. He quenches my thirst by taking me to life-giving water. He is my shepherd. He restores my soul, and he always makes sure that I am safe. But in today's passage, we're going to get to the part where things kind of turn just a little bit. The sheep is looking to the other sheep on the other side of the fold, and he's telling him how good his shepherd is. But now it's almost as if the sheep turns from the other sheep, and he looks to his shepherd directly. He makes eye contact with him. Watch this transition that happens. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Did you see the transition there in the vocabulary? David, up to this point, has been talking about God. But then all of a sudden, he turns from talking about God, this metaphor, this good shepherd, and now he starts talking directly to God. He says to the other sheep, the Lord is my shepherd. He makes me lie down. He takes me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me on the right paths. And then he transitions to looking directly at God and says, because you go with me wherever I go, you are with me. I will not be afraid. Now, if you've ever attended a memorial service, and I'm sure that we all have, you've heard the 23rd Psalm read. If you have ever walked through a cemetery, you will see the imagery of the shepherd and the sheep on many, many tombstones, and most likely you'll see these 6 verses written on tombstones. They're quoted at the gravesides of paupers, and they're quoted at the memorial services of kings. As a matter of fact, those who know nothing about the Bible can normally tell you something about the shepherd and the valley and the shadow of death. Why are these words so important to us? Why do we treasure them, particularly at funerals and memorial services when life comes to an end? I think there are a couple of reasons why. David addresses 2 key factors about life. And the very first thing that he talks about in this psalm is that, or in this passage that we're looking at today, is that death is to be expected. One of the things that the psalm does for us more than any is it helps us come to peace with death. Death is one of those subjects that most of us would really not rather think about or even talk about. I mean, we'll put it away on the shelf and we know inevitably it's going to come one day, but we'll deal with it when it happens. But David, the wise shepherd, says it is wise to actually deal with death up front. Because people who are prepared to die or prepared to handle death are actually those who are most prepared to live. We live in a world that is mocked by the fact that death is inevitable. Doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, school appointments, one appointment right after another. I said jokingly, years ago I'd go into the doctor for a physical or checkup, and he'd go, do you have any problems with this? And I go, no. Went in not too long ago, and he said, do you have any problems with that? I go, well, yeah, kind of. Yeah, son, no, just saying, yeah. It goes down the list. I can feel I'm getting older. You can feel the aches and the pains a little bit more. Why are doctors and dentist appointments so necessary? Well, it's because of the fact that life has a beginning and sadly it has an end. The Bible is very clear about this, and it speaks about this up front. Paul in Hebrews tells us, the 9th chapter, 27th verse, it says, everyone must die, and after that be judged by God. Oh, how we would like to take that verse and just change a couple of words. Wouldn't it be really cool if that verse said nearly everyone has to die? Or what if we just say everyone who forgets to eat their vegetables and takes their vitamins, now they have to die. Nearly everyone must die, but that's not what it says. God's word is pretty clear about this. In his plan, everybody will have a beginning and everybody will have an end. Even those people who eat their vegetables and take their vitamins. Now, for most of us, we probably could have gone all day or maybe all month without even talking about this factor. We do our best to avoid the subject matter. But like I said, the Bible is about life. And if anything is about life, then we've got to understand death a little bit better. The wisest man that ever lived was Solomon. In Ecclesiastes, the 7th chapter, the 2nd verse, he says, we all must die. And everyone living should think about this. You see, we're not really truly ready to live until we are at peace with dying. He's reminding us that we need to be honest with it, that it is something that is inevitable. There's only one psalm in the entire 150 psalms that they believe that Moses wrote. And right in the midst of this psalm, Psalm 90, verse 12, Moses talks about the same subject. Teach us how short our lives really are so that we may be wise. The wise will remember the brevity of life. You see, exercise may buy us a few more heartbeats. Medicine may grant us a few more breaths. But in the end, there is an end. And the best way to face life is to be honest about death. You see, it's people who know that we will not live forever that we treasure the moments that we have. We don't take them for granted. We see them as something very precious, as a gift from God, and we savor them and we value them. David was a man who had slain Goliath, but he had no illusions of being able to sidestep the giant of death. And though at first the reminders of this seem to be a little sober, his reminder really does encourage us that we don't have to face death alone. What is the most frightening thing about death? Whenever I do memorial services or I talk to people in a hospital who are about ready to transition from this world to the other, they say that the death itself doesn't scare them. It's the transition. It's the aloneness, that I have to go it alone, that I can't take somebody with me. It's that scary part of what I've got to do privately and all by myself. David, in this psalm, and what makes it such a peaceful and a healing psalm, and why we use it in memorial services is that we declare that you don't ever have to do anything by yourself. That God is there. That God is at the doorway of life and eternal life. And the transition that he promises us, that we will not go it alone. That's why this verse is so soothing. That the most frightening part of death has been taken away. That I don't do it alone. David says to God, you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. David implies his message is subtle, but it's very crucial. You don't face death without God. Don't even think about death without God. Don't speak about death without God. Because you go through this valley of the shadow of death, that you're not going to do it alone. Others may speculate or aspire, but only God knows the way to get you home. And only God is committed to getting you there safely. It's kind of interesting. Sometimes you don't see people for years and years and years. And then all of a sudden, when there is a death, probably the second phone call that they make is to the pastor of the church. They want the pastor to come to a memorial service and to memorialize them and to talk about heaven and to talk about this passage. That God never intended for us to do it by ourselves. That when we get to the end, that it really is a beginning for God. We talk about crucifixions. God talks about resurrections. We talk about dead ends. God talks about beginnings. And there's nothing any more soothing than to know what this verse is telling us, that even though death is inevitable, that I don't have to do it by myself. Now that's peaceful. Somebody once said, nobody is really truly prepared to live until you are ready to die. So what makes Psalm 23, this verse, really comforting and soothing is you don't have to do it alone. That God is there, and God will help us transition. Now, that's going to help us in that final moment of our life, but most of life is not spent on our deathbed. Most of our life is spent on this journey, and that's the second part that this verse talks about, is that valleys in life are to be expected. Did you see the news this past week when the British Airways had loaded up their plane? They were leaving Miami. They were going to go to London. It was a peaceful flight. The sun was shining. The birds were chirping someplace. The clouds were fluffy. Everything was beautiful. Everything was in place. When all of a sudden, just like we're sitting here today, there was an announcement that came over the intercom that said the plane is about ready to make an emergency landing on water. Now, I don't know about you, but I can think of a lot more places that I'd rather emergency landing happen than on water. It's not the safest place to land a plane. It was interesting, this response. People who were living now are all of a sudden, in a matter of a second, are facing their death. Here's what the CNN article said. It said the relaxed trip from Miami to London was turned into a nightmare for some British Airways passengers after the cabin crew mistakenly activated an emergency water landing alert. The plane was in the middle of the Atlantic when a recorded message informed passengers that the aircraft was going to make an emergency landing on water. It took the crew no longer than 30 seconds to realize that a grave error it was, but for the scared passengers, those seconds were an eternity. We looked at each other and we figured out that we're just about ready to die. Duncan Smith, 58, told the Daily Telegraph. Families with children were distraught. People were in tears. It was very distressing. People were screaming in horror. Tracy Smith, his wife, said it still makes me very emotional when I think about it because it was traumatic. I thought to myself, that's really kind of a perfect picture for life. Everything is smooth sailing when all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, comes the abrupt, comes the unthinkable, comes the valleys. There's an old Arabian parable that says this. It says, all sunshine and no rain actually makes a desert. If you have never had down times or dark times, gloomy times, then your life's going to be dried up. If you've never had death to yourself, if you've had no discouragement, you've had no low valleys, then there's probably been no depth developed, no maturity. You see, it takes both good times and bad times to make a person complete. It takes both good times and bad times to make a mature person. Life is going to be a mixture of pain and pleasure, of victory, of defeat, of success and failure, of mountaintops and valleys. That if you want to experience the mountaintops, you will have to go through the valleys to get there.